What if I told you that your worm bin might be trying to do two completely different jobs at the same time, and that could be slowing everything down? Most people run one worm bin and they just call it a day, and honestly, for the vast majority of worm farmers, that works just fine. But if you're serious about producing high quality worm castings, or scaling your system, or even selling worms, then separating your worm breeding bin from your castings bin might completely change the game. Today, we're going to break down whether you should run one bin or two, what the difference actually is, and how to decide what makes sense for you. I'm Sunny from Sunnyside Soil. Let's dig in. So here's the big question. Is it a good idea to separate a worm castings bin from a worm breeding bin? And the honest answer is yes. Yes, it is. But only if your goals justify it. If you're a backyard gardener who just wants beautiful soil, strong seedlings, and happy houseplants, then one bin is perfectly fine. Worms naturally eat, reproduce, and create castings all in the same environment all the time. That's how they operate in nature. But once you start thinking about production, consistency, or scaling, that single bin system starts to show its limitations. What exactly is happening in a single bin system? Well, in a traditional home vermicomposting setup, everything happens together. You add food scraps and bedding, the worms eat the material, microbes break it all down, worms reproduce, and eventually you harvest castings. It's simple, it works, and it's just low maintenance. But here's what most people don't realize. Breeding and production require slightly different conditions to truly optimize each one. When we combine them, we are asking one system to serve two masters. What does a breeding bin actually need? Well, if your goal is to maximize worm population growth, you want stability. A breeding bin should be relatively undisturbed, consistently moist, rich in soft bedding material, lightly but regularly fed at the surface, and protected from temperature swings. When worms feel safe and comfortable, they produce more cocoons. Those cocoons hatch into baby worms. Those baby worms mature and multiply. Disturbing the bin too often, harvesting castings aggressively, or letting moisture swing too far in either direction can reduce those reproduction rates. A breeding bin is not about output. It is about population expansion. That's a key difference. Really, think of it as your worm nursery. So how is that different from a worm castings production bin? Well, let's look at the other side now. A casting bin is all about throughput. You are feeding it heavily. You are encouraging rapid breakdown. You are harvesting on a schedule, and you might actually be rotating worms in and out. Now this system is more active. You are managing moisture, aeration, and you're feeding the bin with the goal of producing finished castings efficiently. Now don't get me wrong, the worms are still reproducing in this bin, but reproduction is not the primary objective. Castings are. Here is the key insight. High disturbance harvesting cycles can interrupt optimal breeding conditions. That does not mean that worms start producing. It just means that you are not maximizing that specific function. So why can separation be so powerful? Well, when you separate the systems, you gain control. Your breeding bin becomes your population engine. It continuously generates worms and cocoons. Your production bin, on the other hand, becomes your output engine. It turns organic matter into castings on a predictable schedule. Now this gives you several advantages. First, you protect your breeder population. You're not accidentally harvesting large number of mature worms when you collect castings. Second, you're stabilizing your output. If one bin slows down, then the other can compensate. And third, you can scale intentionally. If demand increases, you can expand production bins without stressing out your breeder population, and vice versa. For anyone selling worms or castings, this separation creates consistency, and it's the consistency that builds the trust. So here's the real question that you should be asking yourself. Instead of asking whether separation is good or bad, ask yourself this: what am I trying to maximize? If you want simplicity and you're just a backyard gardener wanting to use vermicomposting, then just run one bin. If you want worm biomass growth, then consider separating them. If you want consistent castings production at a higher volume, then separation might become attractive as well. You can't really fully optimize both breeding and heavy harvest production in the exact same environment. Now, you can do both reasonably well in one bin, but if you want to push performance, then specialization helps. Nature specializes, so can we. Here's a quick practical example. Let's say that you start selling worm castings locally. You harvest aggressively every 4 weeks. You sift thoroughly, you disturb the bedding deeply. Over time, you notice that your worm population fluctuates. Some harvests are full of mature worms and others seem lighter. Now, imagine instead that you maintain one untouched breeder bin. You only remove a small number of worms from it to seed your production bins. Your breeder bin population remains stable and growing. Your production bins, they do all the heavy lifting. If a production bin crashes, you are not starting from zero. You just reseed it with worms from your breeder bins. That is operational security. Now, again, to reiterate, is this necessary for everyone? No, it is not. If you are composting kitchen scraps and feeding your garden, you probably do not need two systems. A single well-managed bin can provide more than enough castings for home use. But if you're building inventory, selling at markets, supplying friends, or thinking long-term about scaling, separating your system makes your life a lot easier. It reduces risk, it increases predictability, and it creates a more professional workflow. So my perspective, personally, I think that separation makes the most sense once you cross from hobbyist into producer. When worms become part of your soil strategy at scale, organization matters. And really, there is something satisfying about knowing one bin is dedicated to building the future population, while another is producing today's soil amendment. It just feels more intentional. So if you found this helpful, then let me know in the comments how many bins are you currently running and whether you have ever considered separating breeding bins from production. And if you actually want me to go into a deeper breakdown of what an ideal breeding bin setup actually looks like, then let me know. We can absolutely get into the science of moisture levels, density, and the feeding strategies in an upcoming video. And if you are looking for a community that is creating conversations and courses around vermicomposting, composting, and soil health, well, we are building one over at Sunnyside Soil. I will leave the link in the description below.